I'm Helen, 62 female. My husband David and I live in the same quiet, tree-lined suburban home where we raised our two children. After 40 years of marriage and two fulfilling careers, ours is a life built on stability, mutual respect, and the simple joy of a predictable routine. I thought we had passed these values down to our son Liam and our daughter Emily, but I was about to discover how spectacularly I had been wrong. This is the story of how a single Thanksgiving dinner became the stage for an ultimatum that threatened to tear our family apart, and how I was forced to expose a devastating truth to save us all from a carefully constructed fantasy. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The week before Thanksgiving was always a flurry of comfortable chaos in our home. The air, usually settled and calm, began to hum with the energy of anticipation. It was a symphony of familiar scents and sounds, the faint aroma of cinnamon and nutmeg I'd test in a pre-holiday apple crisp, the rustle of old recipe cards, and the gentle thud of my husband David's footsteps as he brought down the extra folding chairs from the attic. For over 3 decades, Thanksgiving had been our family's sacred holiday. It wasn't about lavish gifts or grand gestures. It was about the simple, profound act of being together. It was the one day a year I knew I'd have both my children, Liam and Emily, under my roof, their laughter echoing in the halls where they grew up. This year, however, a subtle dissonance had crept into the usual harmony. It started with small, almost unnoticeable things. My calls to our son, Liam, felt managed. He was always rushing off the phone, citing a critical investor call or a deadline for a pitch deck. His wife, Chloe, was even more elusive. My text to her, usually about simple things like what appetizer they might bring, would be answered hours later with a curt, professionally polite response that felt like it had been dictated to an assistant. Helen, so thoughtful of you, we'll have it covered. Best, see who signs a text to their mother-in-law with their initial. David, ever the pragmatist, brushed it off. They're busy, Helen, he'd say, not looking up from his newspaper. Liam's got that startup and Chloe's art gallery world is demanding they're building their future. I wanted to believe him. As a retired school principal, I understood ambition. I'd spent my career fostering it in young people, but this felt different. This felt like a deliberate distancing, a carefully managed wall being erected brick by brick. Our daughter Emily felt it too. She called me 2 days before the holiday, her voice laced with a quiet concern that mirrored my own. Mom, have you spoken to Liam this week? He seems stressed more than usual. Emily, a librarian, possessed a gentle, observant nature. She saw the nuances in people that others missed, the stories written in their silences. I tried to ask him if everything was okay, she continued, and he just said things were at a crucial juncture. Chloe was on her phone the whole time we were supposed to be having coffee. She was scrolling through photos of these ridiculously expensive-looking houses in the city. That was the first real flag. Houses. Liam and Chloe lived in a perfectly nice, trendy apartment downtown. It was small, but it was chic and modern, a backdrop for the sophisticated life Chloe curated on her social media. They often complained about the lack of space, but always in a way that sounded more like a fashionable grievance than a genuine problem. They weren't saving, not in any serious way that David and I could see. Their life was a parade of gallery openings, weekend trips to wine country, and dinners at restaurants where the menus didn't have prices. They were living the life they wanted, but it seemed to be a life funded by every dollar they earned and perhaps more. The day before Thanksgiving, a floral delivery arrived. It wasn't the usual simple bouquet Chloe might send. It was an obscenely large architectural arrangement of white orchids and exotic leaves that must have cost a fortune. It was beautiful but starkly out of place in our warm, slightly worn living room. The card read, "Can't wait for tomorrow. We have the most exciting news to share with everyone. It's going to change everything. Love, L and C." The words "change everything" sent a chill down my spine. They were words freighted with drama, with the kind of self-importance I'd seen in my son more and more since he'd married Chloe. Liam had always been ambitious, but Chloe had refined that ambition into a relentless, status-driven pursuit. She was a woman who seemed to view life as a series of acquisitions, the right friends, the right clothes, the right brand of success. My son, C. captivated by her glamour and confidence, seemed to have adopted her worldview entirely. That evening, as David and I sat in the quiet living room, the scent of the sterile orchids overpowering the familiar smell of pine from our garden, I felt a deep sense of foreboding. I looked at my husband, whose face was etched with the comfortable lines of a life well lived. He was a retired civil engineer, a man who believed in solid foundations, in structures that were built to last. He had taught our children how to build things, how to be self-sufficient, how to respect the slow, steady process of creating a stable life. The most exciting news, I murmured, reading the card again. What do you suppose that means, David? He finally lowered his book, his brow furrowed. He had felt the shift too, I could see it in his eyes. With them, who knows, he said, his voice heavy. A promotion, a trip around the world, or maybe they've finally invented a new color. His attempt at humor fell flat, the joke lost in the cavernous space that had opened between our perception of our son and the man he seemed to be becoming. The gathering storm was no longer on the horizon. It was directly overhead, and I felt a dreadful certainty that our carefully planned Thanksgiving was about to be the place it finally broke. All we could do was wait for the rain. Thanksgiving morning arrived with a deceptive calm. The sky was a crisp, brilliant blue, and the sunlight streaming through the kitchen window made the familiar space feel warm and safe. I moved through the morning on autopilot, my hands performing the practiced choreography of the holiday feast. I stuffed the turkey, peeled the potatoes, and rolled out the pie crust, finding a fleeting sense of comfort in the rhythm of the tasks. Emily arrived early, her presence a balm. She brought a homemade cranberry sauce and a quiet, steady energy that helped ground me. We worked side by side, our conversation light and easy, carefully avoiding the subject of Liam and Chloe. It was a silent pact to preserve the peace for as long as we could. David was in his element, tending to the fire in the hearth and setting the long dining table with the good china we only use twice a year. He moved with a deliberate slowness, his actions a testament to the traditions he cherished. He was the anchor of our family, and I could see he was trying to hold everything steady against the coming tide. Liam and Chloe were due to arrive at 2 o'clock. At 2:15, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Liam. Running a bit late, so much to coordinate, see you soon? I stared at the words coordinate. What did one need to coordinate to attend a family dinner just a 40-minute drive away? They finally swept in at nearly 3 o'clock, not with apologies, but with an air of breathless importance, as if they were celebrity guests gracing us with their presence. Liam was dressed in a sharp blazer and designer jeans, looking more like he was heading to a business meeting than a family meal. Chloe was the epitome of curated elegance in a cashmere sweater dress and knee-high leather boots. She air-kissed my cheek, her perfume expensive and overpowering. Sorry we're late, everyone, Chloe announced to the room, her voice bright and performative. We were on a call with our real estate agent. Things are moving so fast, it's thrilling. Emily shot me a look from across the room, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and confirmation of her earlier suspicions. David's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The news from the card hung in the air throughout the appetizer hour. Liam and Chloe deflected all questions with theatrical winks and promises that all will be revealed. They spoke loudly about their recent trip to a Michelin-starred restaurant and a piece of art Chloe had acquired for her gallery, conversations that seemed designed to highlight their sophisticated lifestyle, drawing a stark contrast to our comfortable suburban world. It felt less like catching up and more like a presentation. Liam, my son who once spent hours explaining the intricacies of his model rockets to his father, was now a stranger who spoke in a dialect of buzzwords and brand names. Finally, we all gathered around the dining table. The turkey, golden and glistening, sat in the center, a symbol of the unity and abundance I so desperately wanted this day to represent. David said grace, his voice steady as he gave thanks for our family and our blessings. For a moment, a fragile peace settled over the room. It was shattered before the first slice of turkey was even carved. Well, Liam began, clearing his throat and placing his fork down with a decisive click. He reached for Chloe's hand across the table. I know you're all waiting to hear our big news. He paused for dramatic effect, his eyes sweeping over us. Chloe and I have decided to take the next major step in our lives. We've found our dream home. The chorus of congratulations went around the table. Emily smiled genuinely. Oh, Liam, that's wonderful. Where is it? It's in the Westlake district. Chloe jumped in, her eyes shining with a feverish intensity. It's a four-bedroom modern colonial with a pool and a view of the city. It's an absolute statement piece. David, ever the engineer, asked the practical question. That's a very expensive area, kids. You must have been saving diligently. Liam waved his hand dismissively. That's the other part of the news. He sat up straighter, his expression shifting from celebratory to serious. It was a look I recognized from my time as a principal, the look of a student about to make a demand they knew was unreasonable. We've put in an offer, it's been accepted. Wow, things really are moving fast, I said, a knot tightening in my stomach. How did you manage the down payment so quickly? This was it, the moment the storm would break. Liam looked directly at me and David. His voice was firm, stripped of any warmth. We haven't, that's where you two come in. The down payment is $500,000, we need you to give it to us. Silence, the clinking of silverware stopped. Emily's fork was frozen halfway to her mouth. David stared at his son, his face a mask of disbelief. The words echoed in the sudden, deafening quiet. We need you to give it to us, not we were hoping for some help, not we'd like to discuss alone. It was a demand, an expectation. I finally found my voice, though it came out as a strained whisper. Liam, we don't have that kind of money just sitting around. That's a significant portion of our retirement savings. Chloe scoffed, a small, ugly sound. Oh, Helen, please, David was a successful engineer. You were a principal. We know you have investments. We've seen the value of this house. You're sitting on a gold mine. My blood ran cold. She had looked up the value of our homes, their home. The home my husband and I had poured our lives into. This is our retirement, Chloe, David said, his voice dangerously low. It's for our future, for our security, for if one of us gets sick. Liam leaned forward, his expression hardening into something I didn't recognize. It was cold, entitled, and utterly devoid of empathy. And we are your future, he said, his voice rising. This is about our family's legacy. Do you want your grandchildren, when we have them, to grow up in a cramped apartment? Or do you want them to have a real home, a symbol of this family's success? He was using the idea of future children as a weapon. And if we can't or won't give you $500,000, I asked, my heart pounding against my ribs. Liam took a deep breath and delivered the final, devastating blow. He squeezed Chloe's hand, a gesture of solidarity against us. Then we'll have to make some difficult choices, he said, his tone icy and final. We can't afford to maintain relationships with family who aren't willing to invest in our future. If you can't help us with this, then we can't be a part of this family anymore. No more holidays, no more visits. We'll be cutting you off completely. The ultimatum hung in the air, thick and poisonous. He was asking us to buy his love, to purchase our place in his life. My son was holding our relationship hostage, and the ransom was our financial security. The warm, happy Thanksgiving I had envisioned had dissolved into a nightmare. In its place was a cold, transactional negotiation where my husband and I were not parents, but uncooperative investors, and our love was an asset to be leveraged. The proposition wasn't just shocking, it was a fundamental betrayal of what it meant to be a family. The aftermath of Liam's ultimatum was a thick, suffocating silence. It felt as if all the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving behind only the weight of his words. Emily was pale, her eyes darting between Liam and me, a look of profound hurt on her face. David sat like a statue carved from granite, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the table. The magnificent turkey sat untouched, a feast turning cold. Chloe was the first to move, dabbing the corners of her mouth with a linen napkin as if she'd just finished a pleasant meal. Well, she said with a brittle smile, we knew this might be a lot to process. We'll give you some time to think it over. We expect your answer by the end of the weekend. She stood up, pulling a bewildered Liam with her. He refused to meet my eyes. He looked at the wall, at the floor, anywhere but at the family he had just fractured. You're not staying for dinner, Emily's voice was barely a whisper. We've lost our appetites, Chloe replied, her tone dripping with faux sympathy. The emotional toll of this conversation, you know. And with that, they walked out of our home, leaving the front door to click shut behind them, a sound that felt as final as a gavel. For a long time, nobody spoke, the three of us, David, Emily, and I. Were left stranded in the wreckage. Finally, Emily pushed her chair back. "I'm so sorry, Mom, Dad." Tears were streaming down her face. "I can't believe he would do that. I can't believe they would do that." I went to her and held her, feeling the tremor of her sobs. "It's not your fault, sweetheart. None of this is your fault." David finally spoke, his voice raspy with fury. "He's out of his mind, absolutely out of his mind, cutting us off after everything we've done for him. Who does he think he is?" He slammed his fist on the table, making the silverware jump. It was a rare display of anger from my steady, measured husband, and it scared me more than Liam's coldness. That night, sleep was impossible. David and I lay in bed, the space between us filled with a swirling vortex of anger, confusion, and a deep, gnawing sadness. The son I had raised, the boy I had taught to be kind and responsible, was gone. In his place was a man I didn't know, a man who saw his parents as a bank account to be drained. "It's not him, it's her," David said into the darkness. "Chloe, she's been whispering in his ear since the day they met, all that talk about legacy and statement pieces. That's her language, not his." "He still said the words, David," I replied, my voice hollow. "He stood there and threatened to abandon his family." We talked for hours, cycling through the same emotions. But as the initial shock began to recede, a different feeling started to take root in my mind: suspicion. As a principal, I had dealt with countless students and parents. I had developed a keen sense for when a story didn't add up. And this story, the story of my son and his wife suddenly finding a dream home and needing exactly $500,000 for a down payment, was full of holes. "Something isn't right," I said, sitting up and turning on the bedside lamp. David squinted at the sudden light. "Think about it. Why now? Why so urgent? Why an ultimatum instead of a conversation?" "Because they're entitled and spoiled," he grumbled. "No, it's more than that," I insisted. "This feels desperate. Chloe said the offer was accepted. You need to show proof of funds for that, a pre-approval letter from a bank. You can't just make an offer on a multi-million-dollar house with empty pockets. They must have told the sellers something." This was the first thread, a small, nagging inconsistency that I couldn't let go of. My mind started working, shifting from the emotional turmoil of a mother to the analytical framework of an administrator. I needed facts. I needed to understand the foundation of their demand. The next morning, while David was out on a long, angry walk, I sat down at my computer. I started with something simple. I went to the website for Chloe's art gallery. It was sleek and minimalist, filled with photos of abstract paintings and sculptures. I clicked on the About page. It described her as a visionary curator with a keen eye for emerging talent. It all sounded very impressive, but then I navigated to the gallery's public business registration. It was a simple search, something I'd learned to do when vetting potential vendors for my school. The registration listed Chloe as the sole proprietor. The gallery wasn't part of a larger chain, it was her own venture. A brave move, but also a risky one. Galleries are notoriously difficult businesses to keep afloat. Next, I looked up Liam's company. He called himself a visionary at a tech startup named Innovate Next. The company's website was slick but vague, full of jargon about synergizing forward-thinking paradigms and disrupting the digital ecosystem. There were no product descriptions, no client testimonials. I searched for recent news articles or press releases about the company. I found a few from a year ago announcing their initial seed funding, but since then there was nothing. Silence. For a tech startup, a year of silence is often a death knell. I felt a growing unease. Their professional lives, the very foundation of their glamorous lifestyle, seemed to be built on a shimmering facade. Then I did something I felt a little guilty about, but the ultimatum had dissolved any obligation I felt to respect their privacy. I logged onto Chloe's public social media profile. It was a perfectly curated highlight reel. Here she was, clinking champagne glasses at a polo match. Here was Liam, standing next to a rented sports car on a weekend getaway. And here, posted just 2 weeks ago, was a photo of them standing in front of the very house they had described. The caption read, "Futurescaping, manifesting our next chapter, dream home power couple success." The comments were a flood of congratulations from their circle of equally image-conscious friends. But one comment buried deep in the thread caught my eye. It was from a name I didn't recognize. The comment simply said, "Hope you have better luck than the last people who tried to buy that place." The Al fell through at the last minute. Financing is tough on that one. My heart began to beat faster. Financing is tough on that one. That was it. That was the thread I needed to pull. This wasn't a simple case of entitlement. They weren't coming to us from a position of strength dictating terms for their glorious future. They were desperate. Their offer had likely been accepted contingent on securing financing, a financing they couldn't get from a bank. The ultimatum wasn't a power play. It was a last, frantic gamble. They had likely lied to the sellers, and now the clock was ticking. They had backed themselves into a corner and expected us to be their emergency exit. The deceit wasn't just about the money, it was about the entire life they presented to the world and to us. And I realized with a chilling certainty that I was only looking at the tip of the iceberg. The single comment on Chloe's social media post had changed everything. It transformed my grief and anger into a focused, cold resolve. I was no longer just a hurt mother, I was an investigator. My years as a principal had taught me that the truth is often buried beneath layers of misdirection and bravado, and that the only way to find it is to dig. My husband, David, with his engineer's mind for details and processes, was the perfect partner for this excavation. When he returned from his walk, his anger had cooled into a steely determination that mirrored my own. I laid out everything I had found: the vague corporate websites, the lack of recent news about Liam's startup, the fragile nature of Chloe's gallery business, and the crucial social media comment. I saw the same realization dawn in his eyes. "They're in trouble," he said, his voice a low rumble. "They're not building a future, they're trying to patch a sinking ship. And they want to use our life raft to do it," I finished. "But we need to know how big the hole is, David. We need to know exactly what we're dealing with." Our investigation began that afternoon. It felt clandestine, like something out of a spy movie, as we sat together at the dining room table, the same table where the ultimatum had been delivered, our laptops open, the silence punctuated only by the clicking of keys. We started with public records, things that anyone could find if they knew where to look: property records, business licenses, court filings. David, with his methodical approach, took the lead. "Let's start with the house," he said. He pulled up the county property assessor's website and typed in the address Chloe had mentioned. The listing popped up instantly. It was, as she'd said, a beautiful home. It was also, as the commenter had hinted, problematic. The sales history showed it had been on and off the market 3 times in the last 2 years, with 2 pending sales falling through. "That's a red flag," David muttered, zooming in on the details. "Deals don't just fall through that often unless there's a major issue with the property itself or the buyers can't get financing." He cross-referenced the address with the planning department's database. "Here we go," he said after a few minutes of searching. "There's a pending geological survey report. It's in a known landslide risk zone. Most banks won't touch a mortgage for a property like this without exorbitant insurance, if they'll insure it at all." So that was it. No conventional bank would finance their dream home. They weren't just looking for a down payment, they were likely looking for a cash buy, or at least a significant enough portion to appease a very hesitant private lender. The $500,000 wasn't just a piece of the puzzle, it was the entire puzzle. Next, we turned our attention to their businesses. David used a service he had from his professional days to run a corporate credit check on Liam's startup, Innovate Next. The result was bleak. The company had a high-risk credit rating and had recently been flagged for late payments to vendors. It appeared the seed money had run out and no new investors had materialized. The visionary startup was a ghost ship, adrift and taking on water. My task was Chloe's gallery. I dug into online art world forums and blogs looking for any mention of her or her business. The picture that emerged was one of struggle. She was known for hosting lavish opening nights, creating the illusion of success, but the consensus among local art critics and bloggers was that the gallery rarely made significant sales. She was a master of marketing, not of commerce. One blogger described her as someone who sells the sizzle but has no stake. The pieces were falling into place, painting a grim mosaic of financial desperation. But this was all circumstantial. I needed something concrete. I needed to understand their personal financial situation. This was the part that felt the most invasive, the most like a betrayal. But then I remembered Liam's face, cold and hard, as he threatened to cut me out of his life. He had already severed the bonds of trust. I was simply acknowledging it. I remembered that several years ago, when Liam was just starting his career, we had co-signed on a credit card for him to help him build his credit history. He was supposed to have closed that account years ago, but on a hunch, I searched through my old online banking portals, and there it was. The account was still active. My name was still on it as a co-signer, which meant I had legal access to the statements. My heart hammered in my chest as I clicked the link. The statement loaded. I felt a wave of nausea. The card had a balance of over $30,000. It was maxed out. I clicked through the transaction history. It was a digital diary of their fabricated life. There were thousands of dollars in charges for designer clothes from boutiques I'd never heard of. There were charges for five-star hotels for weekend trips they'd flaunted on social media. There were restaurant bills that were more than my weekly grocery budget, and there were cash advances, dozens of them. Small amounts at first, then larger and more frequent. This wasn't the spending of a successful young couple. This was the panicked, frantic spending of people living far beyond their means, using credit to plug the holes in their income. But the most damning discovery was a recurring monthly charge. It was a payment to a company I didn't recognize, Prestige Financial Solutions. It wasn't a bank. I typed the name into a search engine. The results confirmed my fears. It was a high-interest, short-term lender, the kind of place people go to when no one else will give them money, a loan shark in a business suit. David came over to my screen and I pointed to the transaction, my hand trembling slightly. He read it and then scrolled through the endless list of extravagant purchases. He let out a long, slow breath. "My God, Helen," he whispered, "it's a house of cards, a complete house of cards." He was right. Their life was a fiction. The successful startup, the chic gallery, the glamorous trips, it was all a performance funded by debt and deceit. The demand for $500,000 wasn't an investment in their future. It was a desperate, last-ditch attempt to bail out their collapsing present. They weren't trying to build a legacy. They were trying to outrun their consequences. And they had been willing to destroy our family in the process. The anger I felt was now clean and sharp, like a shard of glass. The sadness was still there, a deep ache for the son I thought I had, but it was overshadowed by a grim sense of purpose. They had come to my table and tried to hold a gun to my family's head. They had misjudged me. I was not just a sentimental mother who would crumble under emotional blackmail. I was a principal who had dealt with bullies my entire career. And I knew one thing about bullies: the only way to deal with them is to confront them with the truth, loudly and publicly. The stage was set for Thanksgiving. Now I had to write the script. The deadline Liam and Chloe had given us, the end of the weekend, came and went in a shroud of silence. We didn't call, we didn't text. We let their ultimatum hang in the void unanswered. This, I knew, would unsettle them far more than an angry refusal. Silence is a vacuum, and people who live on validation and control cannot stand it. They would be confused, perhaps even panicked. It was the first step in taking back control of the narrative. Our home, usually so full of warmth in the days after Thanksgiving, felt like a command center. Emily came over every day, her quiet support a rock for me and David. We shared our findings with her, and the hurt in her eyes was slowly replaced by a sad, reluctant understanding. "I knew something was wrong," she said, shaking her head. "I just never imagined it was this bad. They're living a lie." My plan began to form, not out of a desire for petty revenge, but from a place of grim necessity. This wasn't about humiliating them for sport. It was about stopping them. It was about protecting our family, what was left of it, and our future. If we just said no, they would paint us as cruel, unloving parents to anyone who would listen. They would control the story, making themselves the victims. If we gave in, we would be enabling their destructive behavior and bankrupting ourselves in the process. Neither was an option. The only path forward was to dismantle their lie so completely, so publicly, that they would have no narrative left to spin. The truth had to be revealed, not whispered. And I decided that the most fitting venue for this revelation was the place where it all began, the family dinner table. But not our table, another one's. My sister Carol hosts a large, extended family Christmas Eve dinner every year. It's the second pillar of our family's holiday traditions, a boisterous affair with aunts, uncles, and cousins. Liam and Chloe always made a point to attend, holding court and subtly showing off their success to the wider family. It was their stage. This year, I decided it would be mine. My objective was clear. I needed to create an undeniable, unavoidable confrontation with the facts. I couldn't just stand up and make accusations. That would devolve into a shouting match of he said, she said. I needed proof, tangible, irrefutable proof. For the next 3 weeks, David and I worked with a quiet, focused intensity. We were no longer just parents, we were a team executing a project. David, the engineer, handled the logistics and data. I, the principal, handled the strategy and presentation. David took the credit card statements, the ones I was a co-signer on, and created a simple, powerful spreadsheet. He categorized every expense: luxury retail, fine dining, high-interest loan payments, cash advances. He then created a series of pie charts and graphs that visually represented their spending habits. It was a stark, clinical depiction of a financial death spiral. Meanwhile, I compiled a different kind of evidence. I took screenshots of Chloe's social media posts, the photo in front of the house, the captions about manifesting success, the photos of lavish trips that corresponded directly with massive credit card bills. I printed the public records about the house's failed sales and its location in a landslide risk zone. I printed the articles about Liam's startup from a year ago, followed by a blank page titled Recent Company News, to emphasize the silence. I printed the damning report on the company's high-risk credit rating. I assembled it all into a single, professional-looking folder. On the cover, I printed a simple title, The Liam and Chloe Financial Proposal, A Review. Inside, each piece of evidence was a separate laminated page. It was the kind of file I would have prepared for a difficult school board meeting. It was sober, factual, and impossible to argue with. The last page of the folder was a simple, one-page summary. It showed their total known debt, the credit card, the high-interest loan we could infer from the payments, and contrasted it with their estimated income, which David had conservatively projected based on industry averages for their struggling professions. The result was a massive, unsustainable deficit. I called my sister Carol and told her I wanted to make a special toast on Christmas Eve. It's a tribute to the family, I said, keeping my voice light, a celebration of what's truly important. She was delighted and readily agreed. The final piece of the plan was the most delicate. I had to ensure Liam and Chloe would be there. After 3 weeks of silence from us, they were likely desperate for a resolution. I knew they wouldn't reach out to me or David, their pride wouldn't allow it, but they might reach out to Emily. I had a quiet conversation with my daughter. I know they'll call you, I said. They'll try to get information to use you as a go-between. When they do, I need you to tell them one thing. Just say that Dad and I have been thinking and we want to discuss our decision with them in person, with the whole family present on Christmas Eve. Emily was hesitant. Mom, are you sure about this? It's going to be a nightmare. The nightmare has already happened, sweetheart, I told her gently. This is just turning on the lights. She agreed, and just as I predicted, Liam called her 2 days before Christmas Eve. His tone, she later told me, was a strange mix of arrogant and anxious. He complained about our childish, silent treatment and demanded to know what was going on. Emily played her part perfectly. She told him we were ready to talk and that we wanted to do it at Aunt Carol's. I could almost hear the gears turning in Liam's head, a public announcement. To him, that could only mean one thing: public capitulation. He would envision us, his parents, standing up in front of everyone and gallantly announcing that we were funding their dream home. It would be his ultimate victory, a public validation of his importance. He and Chloe would be the stars of the show. We'll be there, he told Emily. The stage was set, the actors had their scripts, though only I knew the true ending. I placed the folder into my handbag. It felt heavy not just with the weight of the paper, but with the weight of what I was about to do. I was going to detonate a truth bomb in the middle of my family's most cherished gathering. It would be brutal, it would be painful, but it was the only way to stop the spread of a disease that had been masquerading as ambition. I felt no joy, only a grim, unwavering resolve. Christmas Eve at my sister Carol's house was a masterpiece of festive chaos. The air was thick with the scent of roasted ham and pine needles. Laughter and carols spilled from the living room, where a fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow on the faces of 3 generations of our family. Aunts, uncles, and cousins mingled, sharing stories and glasses of eggnog. It was a perfect picture of familial harmony, and I was about to shatter it into a million pieces. My handbag containing the folder felt like a lead weight on my shoulder. David stood beside me, his hand resting on the small of my back, a silent, solid presence. Emily hovered nearby, her face pale, her eyes wide with nervous anticipation. We were a tight, anxious knot in the center of the joyful room. Liam and Chloe arrived fashionably late, of course. They made their entrance as they always did, with an air of regal condescension. They were a vision of success, Liam in a tailored wool coat and Chloe in a dramatic, festive red dress. They moved through the room, accepting compliments and basking in the attention, completely oblivious to the judgment that was about to befall them. I watched my son, my handsome, charming son, and felt a pang of profound grief for the boy he used to be and the man he had failed to become. When Liam saw me, he gave me a tight, triumphant smile. It was the smile of a victor. He believed he had won. He thought our silence was surrender and that this public forum was for his coronation. That single, smug expression erased any lingering doubt I had about what I was about to do. Dinner was a loud, happy affair. The long table was laden with food, a testament to Carol's generosity. Liam and Chloe were seated directly across from me and David. Throughout the meal, they spoke loudly about their imminent move, dropping hints about the size of their new home and the very exciting partnership they had formed with their parents to make it happen. Several of my cousins offered them enthusiastic congratulations. Liam soaked it all in, nodding graciously as if he were accepting an award. Chloe looked at me once, a flicker of pure, unadulterated triumph in her eyes. Finally, the dessert plates were cleared, and my sister Carol tapped her glass for attention. "Everyone," she announced warmly, "my sister Helen has something she'd like to share with us all, a special holiday toast." A hush fell over the 30 people in the room. All eyes turned to me. Liam leaned back in his chair, a look of smug expectation on his face. He crossed his arms, ready to receive his tribute. I stood up, my legs feeling surprisingly steady. I took the folder out of my handbag and placed it on the table in front of me with a soft thud. I didn't open it yet. "Thank you, Carol," I began, my voice clear and even. I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of my family members. This holiday is about family, truth, and love, and sometimes love requires us to tell difficult truths, especially when a part of our family is in deep, deep trouble. Liam's smile faltered, Chloe's expression tightened. "As many of you have heard," I continued, my gaze locking onto my son, "Liam and Chloe have some very big plans. They've found a new house and they've asked David and me for a significant financial contribution. They presented this to us on Thanksgiving as an ultimatum: give them $500,000 or be cut off from their lives and the lives of any future grandchildren." A collective gasp went through the room. My sister's jaw dropped. The festive atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a shocked, tense silence. "Before making such a life-altering decision," I went on, my voice like ice, "David and I decided to do our due diligence just as any responsible financial partner would. We wanted to understand the foundation of this investment, so we prepared a small review." I opened the folder. The room was so quiet I could hear the rustle of the laminated pages. First, the house. I held up the printout of the property listing. A beautiful home. It's also in a documented landslide risk zone, which is why 2 previous sales have fallen through and why no conventional bank will offer a mortgage. It's not an investment, it's a liability. Chloe turned deathly pale. Liam looked as if he'd been slapped. Second, their income. I held up the page detailing their struggling businesses. Liam's startup, Innovate Next, has not received funding in over a year and has a high-risk credit rating for failing to pay its vendors. Chloe's gallery, while beautifully marketed on social media, is a sole proprietorship that is, by all public accounts, hemorrhaging money. This is ridiculous, Chloe hissed, her voice trembling. This is private information. Actually, it's not, David interjected, his voice calm and authoritative. It's all in the public record, just like this. He reached into his own coat pocket and pulled out the spreadsheet he had made. He didn't show it to the room, he simply placed it on the table facing Liam. This is the statement for the credit card we co-signed for you years ago, Liam, the one you never closed, the one with a $30,000 balance filled with charges for a life you clearly cannot afford. Liam stared at the paper as if it were a snake. And that brings me to the final point, I said, my voice dropping. The debt. I held up the screenshot of the payment to the high-interest lender. This is why your demand was so urgent. You're not just broke, you are in a catastrophic amount of debt to predatory lenders. The $500,000 was never a down payment for a dream home. It was a desperate attempt at a bailout. You weren't asking us to invest in your future. You were asking us to pay for your lies. I closed the folder. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by Chloe's ragged breathing. Liam finally looked up at me, his face a twisted mask of rage and humiliation. How could you? He spat, his voice cracking. How could you do this to me, to us, in front of everyone? How could you? I shot back, my own voice rising with all the pent-up pain and anger of the last month. How could you threaten to abandon your family? How could you try to manipulate and blackmail your own parents, who have given you nothing but love and support your entire life? Chloe suddenly stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She pointed a shaking finger at Liam. This is your fault, she shrieked, her carefully constructed composure completely shattered. I told you this was a stupid idea. I told you your parents were not as stupid as you thought. You and your dead-end company, you were supposed to be a genius. Me, Liam shouted back, getting to his feet. What about your stupid gallery? The one that's a black hole for money? All you do is buy expensive clothes and throw parties we can't afford. You're the one who found that ridiculous house. You're the one who's obsessed with image. The fight was raw, ugly, and deeply personal. They tore into each other, years of resentment, blame, and financial anxiety erupting in a torrent of vicious accusations. The whole family sat frozen, watching the nuclear meltdown of a marriage that had been built on a foundation of fantasy. It was a feast of consequences, and they were devouring each other. Finally, Chloe grabbed her purse. I'm done, she sobbed, tears carving paths through her perfect makeup. I am so done with you. She turned and fled the room, her dramatic red dress a slash of color against the stunned silence she left behind. Liam stood there for a moment, his chest heaving, his face white with shock. He looked around the room at the faces of his family, at their expressions of pity and disgust. There was no support for him here. He had burned every bridge. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and utter desolation. Then, without another word, he turned and followed his wife out into the cold night. The front door slammed shut, the sound echoing the finality of a chapter violently closed. In the wake of Liam and Chloe's catastrophic exit, a new kind of silence descended upon the room. It was not the tense, anticipatory silence of before, but a heavy, somber quiet filled with the ghosts of the words that had been said. My family, aunts, uncles, cousins, sat in stunned disbelief, their faces a mixture of shock, pity, and a dawning, horrified understanding. The festive Christmas Eve dinner had turned into a public vivisection of a relationship, and no one knew what to do with the pieces. My sister Carol was the first to move. She came to me and wrapped her arms around my shoulders. Oh, Helen, she murmured. I had no idea. I am so sorry. Her words broke the spell, and a low murmur of conversation rippled through the room as people began to process the sheer scale of the implosion they had just witnessed. There were no judgments directed at me or David, only soft words of support and sad shakes of the head for Liam. The evidence I had presented was too stark, their reaction too revealing. There was no ambiguity about who the architects of this disaster were. David, Emily, and I left soon after. The drive home was quiet. The car was filled with a profound sense of exhaustion, the adrenaline of the confrontation having given way to a deep, weary ache. I had won. I had exposed their lies and protected our family's security, but there was no triumph in it. I had been forced to publicly destroy my own son's life to save him from himself, and the cost of that victory felt immeasurable. I had lost my son, perhaps forever. In the days that followed, the silence from Liam and Chloe was absolute. This time, it wasn't a strategic power play, it was the silence of shame and severance. We heard through the grapevine of family gossip what happened next. Their meltdown at the party was just the beginning. The public humiliation was a blow from which their fragile image-based relationship could not recover. They retreated into their apartment, and the arguments, we were told, were explosive. The financial pressure, now exposed, became a crushing weight they could no longer ignore. The high-interest lenders, no longer placated by promises of a parental bailout, came callings. About 2 weeks into the new year, Emily received a short, formal email from Chloe. It announced that she and Liam were separating and that she had moved out. She was filing for divorce. The power couple had been a fiction held together by debt and delusion, and the truth had been the solvent that dissolved their bond. Another month later, we learned that Liam had lost his apartment. He had abandoned his failed startup, and we heard he was staying on a friend's couch. He made no attempt to contact us, not to apologize, not to rage, not even to ask for help. The shame was a wall he had built around himself, and it was impenetrable. Life settled into a new, quieter rhythm for David and me. The wound of our son's estrangement was a constant, dull pain. There were moments when I would see a young man who looked like him on the street and my heart would seize, or when a memory from his childhood would surface unbidden, bringing with it a fresh wave of grief. David felt it too. I would find him sometimes, standing in Liam's old bedroom, just looking at the trophies and posters that still adorned the walls, a silent testament to a boy who no longer existed. Emily was our bridge back to normalcy. She visited often, her presence a quiet reassurance that not all was lost. We celebrated her 30th birthday with a small, peaceful dinner. There was a hole at the table where Liam should have been, a silent guest at every family gathering. About 6 months after that fateful Christmas Eve, I received a letter. It was postmarked from a city 3 states away. The handwriting on the envelope was Liam's. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was not the angry tirade I might have expected, nor was it the heartfelt apology I might have hoped for. It was short, just a few lines, and the tone was hollowed out, devoid of emotion. It read, "Mom, I am working a construction job here. I am paying off my debts slowly. What you did was cruel, but I know now that it was probably the only thing that could have stopped me. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for the way you did it, but I also don't know how to forgive myself for what I became. Don't try to contact me. Liam." I read the letter over and over, tears blurring the words. It was not a reconciliation, but it was an acknowledgement, a sliver of light in a vast darkness. He was taking responsibility, however grudgingly. He was building something new, not with venture capital and buzzwords, but with his own 2 hands. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. The aftermath of our Thanksgiving ultimatum was not a clean, satisfying victory. It was a messy, painful, and deeply complicated resolution. Our family was forever changed, the portrait of our lives permanently altered. There is a new silence in our home, a quiet space that holds both the sorrow of what was lost and the fragile possibility of what might one day be rebuilt. I had set out to expose a truth, and in doing so, I had destroyed a life built on lies. It was a terrible, necessary act, and I know I will carry the weight of it for the rest of my days.